But I think it's important to have that conversation more frequently because we changed so much this year. If they're still seeing it's a strength, then that's good. If they're noticing it's a weakness, like I don't want to wait all year to fix it. I want to be able to fix it along the way.
Or to try and remember how we did something in the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
Now, like, think of the kids when we're trying to prepare for the FSA, and they're like, "We did that this year."
Yeah.
Like, I think,
and that's
trying
my
to.
point. At the end of the day, we're still working with 65 kids. Like we have to keep that in mind. It's
not one kid, one
Right.
class, one teacher. Yeah. All right, so we'll start with the top, and then we can go through like those other questions at the bottom. So you guys saw this in the last meeting. In the following areas, what are the strengths, areas of growth that you may have with a student entering your grade level, and then the current team, please provide steps you'll take in the next month to help support the area, whether that be in any of the subject areas that we identify, something that maybe you could do short term to try to shore it up before they get into that grade. So that would really be you guys, not them. So if there's something big that they can add before the end of the year.
Well, I think talking about strengths first, like we've talked about every year, and we shared this with them too, that every year we feel like they're coming into writing stronger and stronger. And it's not always, like we know that the way you teach writing is through Reader's Workshop, and it's a little bit of a different type of writing, and how much of a beast the FSA writing is in 4th grade. And I think that their knowledge of just writing in general and like writing fluency, basically, like knowing that they can write for a long period of time and the stamina. I think their stamina every year, I'm noticing an increase in stamina. I'm noting an increase just in like sentence structure and being able to write. And specifically, like I know we talked recently about the IRC. This year, they came in and every single student knew what an IRC was and how to use it. So I think we were able, rather than having to teach the structure of the planning sheet, and I felt like we were able to dive right in this year because they had more foundational skills, and that was like, that's huge for us because the right type of writing is so different from what you do.
And they will know the planning, and they will know how to write a really great introduction.
We're getting into the whole essay.
We're getting to the reasons next week.
But even not even that, just having the planning down, because to me, if they can't plan and have that common language of IRC and their A's and B's, I think, I don't know, to me, that is like the most important
Well, and I think 3 years ago that wasn't the case.
No.
Because I remember that conversation when we added it and you guys moved it back and further, you know, I think.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I also think, because this is kind of the conversation we had in our last meeting, that we plan it this way. I know we do workshop at the beginning, and we always end with our top score to get them ready for 4th. But just to foster that love for writing, because we know that not all kids have it, especially coming to us. They don't write for a long period of time.
Right.
So we try to foster like the foundation, and just like that writing is fun, and we write different types of books and what authors do. And I think that, I hope it does help and translate over to top score, and we try to like talk to them about how we can write stories and we can write informational books, but we also have to write essays.
Right.
And
Sometimes follow a formula.
Exactly.
So it makes the transition easier because they consider themselves writers before we start like the more formulaic.
Right.
Writing.
And then a lot of them like it because it is formulaic.
And
Like we had
it's
to talk
easier.
about
It's almost easier.
Yeah.
because it's structure.
There are
and
those
that's fine.
kids like I'm thinking about certain students that you had last year that really love to write narrative, like just stories, and we start with that in the beginning of the year because we are also trying to show that there's a love for writing, but I think we do that kind of quickly. We do the small moment right in the beginning, and then we jump right in. But I do think it's going to hit those certain kids. Like there are certain kids that can't write a narrative at all because they just don't have the creativity or the focus on one thing. Whereas this, it's like, especially with my ESE students, the structure, it's like they finally realize they can also be good at writing. So
I've
I feel
noticed
like
that too, especially over the past couple weeks.
It's very supportive of our lower level kids that just don't even know a starting point. It just gives them, and we found that with Teak too, that helped with the reading response. That was one thing that helped them.
Yeah.
Any areas of growth in writing, something that you find most of the kids are not able to do?
One thing that I think and it may have just been certain kids that I'm thinking of, but like continuing to emphasize transition words. I feel like sometimes some kids I have to emphasize more with that, but that's something that you guys can just continue to do. They do have knowledge of it, but it's something that they need to continue in fourth grade.
More than like first, next.
Yeah.
Right, like
so
very transition words. Okay.
And that's a section on the rubric too, on
For
itself for the score. But I also think, and this is like silly, but always reinforcing like, no, not that, 'cause that's beyond.
Yeah.
But I think even orientation of like writing on paper the proper way, like I feel like and I know you guys probably
try. And it's really hard. At least it's hard for me to teach paragraphs in general. Like it's hard for them to understand when do we really transition, and then the indent, and then the second line after the indent is on the red line. And I always say, notice how we go from the red to the red, but at the beginning, and I like highlighted.
I think that's something though that you guys are fighting against from lower than you, because
Right.
KN1 hit that hard. They hit orientation of the paper, the holes are on the left. That
Right.
you know, I know that they hit that hard. I think it gets a little lost in second because they're not writing as much. And then in third, it's hard to unteach what they've been doing.
Also,
or like it's in the middle.
Right.
Some of them just spatial awareness too always comes into play, like especially with like figuring out the spaces between
and
paragraphs.
Well, we talked about that too, though, in KN1 is legibility of writing and spacing of writing. So that is something they're going to focus more on. You know, they're very focused on formation of letters. And we talked about, like, the truth is legibility is more important than the formation of the P. Like, if you do a P, as long as I can read that it's a P,
it doesn't matter how you do it.
It doesn't matter how you do it. Now, it's important that they learn it initially how to do it correctly.
Yeah, we want to teach
But the legibility is the issue, especially with the transition from computer-based back to paper.
Yeah.
A lot of the middle school teachers are struggling that these kids now that you could type and could be legible are now not going to be legible because of their handwriting. So I think that plays into all of those things, the orientation of just a writer and how it has to be legible, it has to be oriented correctly, like all those pieces.
I think kind of like what you're talking about too with the indentation and the paragraphing, like they either don't indent or many of them indent like halfway to like the middle of the page.
We can explicitly teach it because I
Yeah.
feel like right now we're doing it as we go. We're like,
They
we
do.
forgot, you know.
Yeah.
And they do better when, like on the IRC paper with just when they're just writing the introduction and those black lines are on the paper. I was even trying to celebrate today, like everybody's writing from like the front of the line to the end of the line instead of. But when you give a line piece of paper, I don't know, like the lines are still there.
Or the holes are on the right, and then the staples. Sometimes they pick up a test. They're like, "Is this the right way?" Like, but look at the. Like we open the book this way. Like we even staple it like a book.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but I think even what you're saying about paragraph, I feel like all of that's developmental, like understanding and how do you really explain that? Oh, well, you're shifting ideas and but I think with the IRC, they start to make the connection because they're like, oh, this is all having to do with, like if it's your favorite holiday, this is all having to do with this reason, so it's all one paragraph. And I think that planning sheet helps them to develop structure of paragraphs.
Okay, do you want to go to reading?
Sure.
Do we have any next steps?
I just put explicitly teach orientation of the paper and structure.
And I don't think it's so much like you're saying about what goes into the paragraph, but I think them just like, I have students who are like, oh, my new paragraph's right here, and it's like,
right, just the structure of how to write.
Just like knowing I'm starting a new paragraph, maybe like, let's skip a line.
And that could be us too, because for writing workshop, when we introduced paragraphs, they had to go back and revise, but just put the paragraphs like symbol. So
but you know what? That's okay
too,
because they're allowed to do that on the FS. I mean, when we're teaching lifelong writers, obviously that's not ideal, but on the FSA they can use editing marks and they're not taken off for it. So if they do forget to indent, they can put an indent symbol and it's acceptable. But I think even understanding that you go to the next line, like we have kids that indent with their two finger spaces on the same line
that they
were writing space their next paragraph, and it's like
and I tried showing them books too, like this is a book we're reading, look at how this author does it.
And some of them it's just
I think a deficit for them is technologically when they read, everything's not always indented. If you read an article on the phone and you're in that reader view, it's not always written that way.
Typically it'll be all to
correct,
the left
all
because
left
that's how it is
exactly.
on just any website. It has to be.
So even in a book,
that's
reading
another
a story, you're not like, oh, it's indented here.
Right.
Like,
so sometimes kids will come across articles like that, and they'll say to us, because we harp on it so much, they'll say, but this isn't indented, or they use the word "and" to start a sentence,
and they correct authors.
But at least they're mindful of it.
But I was saying, if they explicitly teach it, at least the kids that
hear
it
kind of trying
hold
to
it,
get
and then it'll be less kids
the
that you have to deal with.
Of it all, not the content that goes into it, but just the we're starting a new paragraph, skipping a line.
But really, every year that they come in, I feel like
it's better.
It's better.
So
every year it gets better.
It's like, oh wow, we really don't have to teach that this year.
So we really appreciate that.
Just knowing what the IRC was just such a big help this year, because we know
it was such an alleviation.
We know what we do is developmentally.
You're like, your teacher said you learned Tux.
No, but that's also good for us because I do say that. Like they play that game in the beginning of the year, and I'm like, no, I know Miss Levine or Miss Caston all the time did this, or you know what I mean, and so it's helpful.
We've been
that
putting
we know.
some of the IRC stuff in our Patete. Like using, like making little charts on the hooks and
That's good.
And I think so. That's funny. You just brought up the hook. It just reminded me. That is something that 8th grade struggles with. Is something they want to even bring down is varied types of hooks. Because what happens is the kids get to 8th grade and they're like, have you ever thought? And Steph will be like, you gotta be joking.
And that's hard for us because when we teach hooks, we spend like a whole week on just hooks. And we make a tree map of 8 different hook types. We talk about a statistic. We talk about a riddle. Yes, it's from Top Score.
Yeah, and then I made that one.
That's what we've been trying to do.
Exactly, and I think that
will be helpful too.
For some reason, especially when they're younger, they gravitate towards onomatopoeias.
It's easier. You know, and I told her that. I said I don't think that. They serve their purpose in 3, 4, 5. Like they have to be able to write a question hook in 3, 4, 5. You can't ask them to do a statistical analysis hook in 3rd grade or 4th grade. I think her concern is she is seeing like a lack of exposure in general to those different types of hooks. But granted, your kids have not gotten to her yet.
Right.
So I think that's I think she will.
That was like 4 years ago.
Right. I think she'll see a difference now, personally. All right, so let's go to reading. Any specific areas of growth that you're seeing there's a gap? Any specific strengths or anything you would like them to look deeper into in reading?
I think a strength, because you've always done Reader's Workshop, is their knowledge of the structure and their love for reading.
Yeah,
they love we have no issues. They could spend 90 minutes reading independently. Like we have no stamina issues with reading at all.
My kids said today even
because if you don't even want to.
Right.
Yeah, we were talking about test taking and how this time of year is just like an icky feeling, and they were just saying how we love reading, we love to read, but we just don't like taking tests. That was like the biggest thing for them, but I think that's really built culturally from you guys because I know they came to me loving to read.
And I think we tried it for the test. We're like, you're still getting to read. It's just you're not choosing what you're reading.
Right.
Like you're still reading a cool story. You're still going to learn cool information.
Yeah, and it's more so attached with the questions.
I know, but I'm trying
to like writing. They
love to write the questions for us too.
Yeah, but they really, you can tell that they already have the love for it coming from you guys. So,
any specific areas of growth as far as like specific standards, specific strands that they struggle with?
Do they do poetry, drama, and prose with you guys at all?
We do a little like understanding stanzas and how the stanzas build.
I have a better understanding of poetry.
Prose we don't have. That's 4th grade. Okay. We do poetry, drama.
We talk about like mood, but like nothing formal, but like what's the mood of the poem?
Yeah. Figurative language.
The words that they're using.
Their standard is just purely identifying the difference. That like a poem has stanzas, a story has paragraphs.
And a drama has stage
of like you can't
and
rearrange the stanzas, just like you're not going to rearrange.
I just felt like this year a lot of my kids had trouble with the structure. Like when we saw I noticed with the lines and stuff like that, they would go to like not so much in a poem, but in the drama, I had a lot of like they thought that the numbers along the sides was like a line number.
That's really confusing because sometimes they number paragraphs, sometimes they number lines, sometimes like the FSA have like a bunch of numbers.
I don't know if you ever see this, but whenever or if this is a concern that you notice, but whenever there's multiple columns, on a paper, they don't know that they read from top to bottom and then to the next column, top to bottom, next column, top to bottom.
I mean, when we do Scholastic News, it's usually two.
We don't do a lot of passage until test prep.
Yeah.
And
So
I feel
maybe
that's
that's
actually a good point to
Social
bring up.
Studies Weekly. That's
No,
something that
that's a
always
good point.
blew
And
my
our
mind.
tests, our tests are all.
See,
So
Sure,
we have
social
like never
studies-
like two.
Yeah.
But even the one from this week, it was across the
No, the
whole
social
time. It
studies
was
is.
down,
Oh.
up, down, up, down.
The
up.
social studies is.
I
like
read it
that.
with them.
no,
Like,
no,
let's
no.
go here now.
And you're right. Scholastic is like that.
Even my highest kids come to
Struggle.
me with that question, like, do I? And the other thing is they're constantly stopping in the middle of something to read a caption or read a photograph or read
Yeah.
a text feature. They're not like, okay, let me preview the text features before, read the text, and then look at the text features again after to help me. They think that they have to, and I'm seeing it in Reading Running Records too.
That's
I
what
I
I
would pause
see.
the timer.
Yeah.
Read the caption. Then
I don't. I just write like red caption.
I write
Right,
caption,
they
but
read
I
it like
notice-
it's part, but then it
So maybe that's
interrupts
something
if
you
it's in
just.
the
If
middle
it's in the
of a
middle of a
sentence.
sentence,
Yeah.
I'm fine with it though if it's on that page.
Me too.
And like
But
it's
they
like
do
the
it
thoughts
in the middle
completed.
of sentences, and then it doesn't make sense, and then they're
And
confused.
then they flip the page.
Right.
So maybe that's just something we have to explicitly cover at some point. Is just say to them when you read in columns, you go from the bottom to the top, and maybe one or two of your tests you put a passage on there that has
That's fine.
columns like that, so
That
they
could
at
be-
least see it.
That could be part of previewing too. We can explicitly
Teach.
go
We have a
over
whole
and just
bed
that
on
order
previewing
of.
text.
Well,
Rubbing
just
up
like
your
add
mind.
some parts more attention, and the next time I see it, I'll make sure.
That's what I mean.
Talk
It's
about
just
it.
more
Yeah.
awareness of like, oh hey, I better
Social
mention
sciences.
this.
And it's those
Yeah.
things that I don't think are ever truly taught. Like, I don't think I would think to teach those things either. But
No,
then a
right.
student comes up to me and says it, and I'm like, oh my gosh,
How do
let's
you not
take
know
a
that?
look
Yeah.
at- And then I go through it with them, but I'm like shocked every time I hear that. And honestly, I think that even again trickles down further too, because it's orientation of
Right.
books and print
And just if you think
But-
about it, like I grew up with my parents reading the newspaper.
right.
So you always read in
It's
columns.
fading.
So
Right.
I think it's also
It's
just exposure and where we are
I
in
think the
things.
Scholastic weeklies are good for that too, because it's like here's half of a page and here's half of, so they have to go.
I do think though the Scholastic News, the deficit is they're not super long, skinny columns. So
Yeah.
it's more like in that setup of like a magazine where it kind of still
Yeah.
flows.
Yeah.
where it
Social
needs
Studies
to.
Weekly does a really good job in the middle
Yes.
section.
And that's where they that's where it
Yeah.
comes out a lot, is in the Social Studies Weekly.
Yeah. Because it's a newspaper and they have no exposure to newspapers.
Right.
And when you read the newspaper on the internet, it doesn't look like that.
No.
So I think I think that's a gap. We were talking about in K2 that is something we're losing with technology, is the ability to see varied types of print. Like they were even talking about recipes and like a recipe book and how it looks different visually when you have something on 2 pages of a recipe book than when you're reading a recipe like on the FSA.
Yeah.
You know, so they were all those things and all those tactile types of books and texts they don't have exposure to. We were talking about Read Your Own Adventure and how like kids would read, there'd be go to this page, they'd have to flip to that page, then go back to like those type of thinking and strategy things. Like they don't deal with that in reading now because everything is manipulated through
But a lot of the Studies Weekly, I read to them like with as like read aloud or and I forget because
You're doing
on
it,
the
right.
doing the reading.
Absolutely.
Habit.
So they just follow along.
And maybe this year we'll see that less because they're reading
Because of
the
the
Studies
Studies
Weekly.
Weekly.
So
Right.
that might
Increase
even,
it.
like,
That's a good point.
go away on its own
Right.
without.
But they didn't have it last year.
Right.
Okay, that's a good point though.
Yeah, I like that.
That may be
Yeah.
different. That they are seeing it in your
Yeah.
Studies Weekly.
Because
so
you're
maybe it'll
model
be-
reading it, and they
I don't really feel like I've seen it that much. Like I definitely in the triple I group, I remember we talked about it, but like as far as like with my class, I don't feel like we've ever had like.
the 2 columns.
I don't think I've ever paid
Well,
attention
we've done
to
like
it.
the columns in
But
the
they
Studies
couldn't.
Weekly, but
you don't think
I
you haven't
can't.
seen that it's an issue.
no, not for like whole group. I mean, maybe like 1 or 2 kids, but nothing like just jumping out at me.
But I'm gonna be more mindful of it now, just
Yeah.
because
Me too.
I'll know it's a good thing.
And I think it could just be that, like they're not used to it. They're not
It's
used
normal.
to seeing
They've
text like
never been
that.
exposed to it. so.
Something I think is a strength is all the different genres. Like, I feel like in years past, not even working here, but prior, I always felt like they didn't know what genre meant. They didn't know that there were multiple genres in fiction. They didn't, and I feel like now they know.
Yeah.
That's like a
Continuing
strength.
to hit home with fiction and nonfiction, because even sometimes still, especially at the beginning of the year, just identifying that, it's a struggle every year, where especially when they get to stories with like if they're reading a biography and all of those things, I think your units that you guys do with biography really helps them solidify that. But sometimes they still get fiction and nonfiction confused a little bit.
They do sometimes?
Yeah,
So.
as specifically at the beginning of the year. That's just one thing that I noticed this year.
It's funny to me because I really think, it's going to sound bad, but I think reading is one of those things where every year I feel like they have to be reminded of, like, retaught everything. Like, story elements. Well, what are story elements? And they're like,
Yeah.
I'm like, you've been doing
Yeah.
story elements since kindergarten. I know you. And that's the thing with
I think
reading
that
is
goes back to
the skills
vocabulary
and
as well.
strategies
Yeah.
don't
Like the way that it's
change.
brought out.
And it also
Yeah.
goes back to
You know,
strategic
like-
thinking, and we were just talking, and they talked about this too, like, our kids in general don't have to problem solve. There's no strategy. They don't play games. They don't have to have a strategy. So they know that if you ask that question and they sit there, you're gonna be like, okay, the
Right.
story elements are, like, I think that's the other piece of it too, is not you. I'm just saying in general, the kids have been conditioned to, like, not think. Like, it's like, oh, it's fine. She'll put them up there again. Like, well, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's the other piece of it, is they're not strategically thinking in other areas of their life. So then when we ask them to strategically think here, they, like, can't do it. They can't
Well,
come
and
up
I
with
feel
those
like
things.
too, us all getting on the same page with the units of study is going to help with that.
Oh, for sure, because you know
Because,
what
like,
they
I
know.
think it lends to what you were
Right.
saying, that the way that we say it might be different from the way it was said in second grade,
Right.
which is a varied form of how you said it. And I think that being all on the same page finally, I think we're going to see that start to drift a little bit.
I agree. I think by the time those kindergartners get up to you guys, you'll be like, oh,
Because I'm thinking about like our fiction units, and we talk a lot about our story mountain and how you open your book and you're introduced to a new friend. We call it a character, don't get me wrong, but
Yeah.
you know, you meet new
But that's what I
characters.
mean, like
and
even calling it a story mountain versus story elements. Like I think,
Story
or
right.
plot
Yeah.
versus story mountain, or like I
right.
think
Well,
that-
you move your way up the mountain, and you
Yeah.
can, you know, there's problems, and you eventually get to the
So
climax.
we call that a
and,
plot mountain
yeah.
instead of a story
Right,
mountain.
and in workshop it's called the story mountain. I mean, they
Yeah.
call it that.
And
So
but
I think
even
it's
saying
just-
that, like, so you teach all that. When I drew the mountain and I was talking to them, they were like, it was like they had never seen it before. Which, of course, we know that that's not the case.
Yeah.
So it's not you, it's the kids. I just think that with reading, it blows my mind that they love to read. They can talk about their books. They can talk about the characters and the problem.
but
and
they're
the
not
solution.
identifying this
But-
is this.
Right.
Yeah.
They're not making the connection between what those skills are named and called and what they're doing as they're reading.
Are they explicitly tested on
That's
that?
what I was gonna say. I said, is that actually really important?
It is.
Well, it's like the learning progressions. Like,
But I'm
Yeah,
just saying,
but
do you
like,
guys have a
you
question
can-
on your test
That says
where you have a picture of the mountain and it says, what is this? And the kids have to identify that's a story mountain.
I'm not saying is it important. I'm saying that
Yeah.
wouldn't you rather a kid open a book and fully understand how the story's going and be able to retell?
For life, yes.
Yes.
For the FSA, no.
Correct.
well, like what kind of question?
But they're not going to ask. I mean, they're going to ask what
She's
what
just
might be
saying
the main problem in the story. But they're
story
not going to say
elements.
like fill out a tree map of the story.
No, but I'm
elements.
saying, like, if it says identify the climax,
Yes,
Oh, they-
absolutely.
But
Yeah.
we teach that too.
They
Yeah.
should know those vocab words,
right?
but we
they
teach in
don't.
different
They, that's what's weird. It's
Right.
like, what are
She's saying
story
it's not
elements?
transferring,
Rising
that she knows
action.
you guys are
Right.
teaching it and she knows they're teaching it, but something is getting
Because we
lost
have
in
questions
We
on our
translation.
said the
That's
same
too.
thing
Yeah.
in 5th grade, though.
But
Like,
they're teaching
they
it. I know they're
forget
teaching it since
everything.
kindergarten. That's what kills me. Is I know they're getting it every year. I don't
But
know
they're not,
what the
they're not
disconnect
connecting
is,
it.
but they're not connecting it. And like, even say text structure, like text structure,
use that in
they
first
make
grade.
it like they don't know what that word is and they've never heard it. What
text
is text structure?
text
Oh,
feature.
that's like
Yeah.
titles
pictures.
and
Yeah.
picture.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
You're like, no, it's
And
not.
The thing, all the thinking maps are based